candidates running for president who met the qualifications for the next presidential debate. I kind of like the first one, by the way. I just wanted to bring that up. We're pleased to welcome those who are here with us today to discuss the issues impacting our community and the nation. Our candidates will have the opportunity to give an opening statement about a minute long, and then we'll sit down and have a conversation, which is what you can't do, by the way, on a debate when there's 10 candidates up on the platform. But to get started, it is my pleasure to welcome our first candidate to the stage, former U.S. Naval Reserve officer. He is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. It is my honor to welcome Mayor Pete Buttigieg to the stage.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Gracias por invitarnos. And I'm so appreciative of the chance to have a conversation today. I am running for president because I believe our country is running out of time, facing urgent issues that have not been dealt with across my lifetime, from an economy where it has now become possible for the gross domestic product to go up and life expectancy to go down at the same time, to issues like gun violence, climate change, and the need for immigration reform that have been discussed for years or even decades without results. I believe those facts lead to strange political outcomes, and I consider the current presidency to be a strange political outcome. In other words, I would ask that we think about how a president like the current one ever came anywhere near winning to begin with, and address the fundamental issues, in addition to the cruelty and incompetence of the current administration. I also believe that in order to meet the challenges of our time, we are going to have to do two things: unify the American people when we are dangerously divided and polarized, and when doing so, unify the American people around solutions that are bold enough to actually confront the problems before us. That is what I believe the presidency is for. The purpose of the presidency is not to glorify the president, it is to unify the people. And I believe that we can achieve that with an agenda that will actually improve the everyday lives of people living in the United States. This is the mentality you bring to the office when you were a mayor. And I bring you greetings from my city, South Bend, a city whose growth right now is almost entirely attributable to immigration, whose Latinx community has added a tremendous amount to the vibrancy and economic vitality of our community, and that recognizes that this is the case for the country as well. So I want to be longer on conversation than monologue. I'll take my seat now, but again, I'm thankful for the work that you are doing, especially at a time when it is so important that everyone stand up and be counted. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. It's good to see you again. Thank you. You were kind enough to come and visit us in Telemundo Center some months ago and be a part of a conversation in both English and Spanish among the, I guess, 5 or 6 idiomas que usted habla, that you speak. But let's talk a little bit about what you talked about. And immigration, for example, I know that in your city, about 8-9% Latino.
Yeah, more than 10 now.
10, yeah. And a state that's like less than 1% right. Latino. And yet you have done things in the city to give voice to Latinos, for example, including a private-public agreement on identifications, for example. Right. Talk to me about what that was, and do you think that that's something that could be a national model?
I think, yes. So what we did in South Bend was we found there were a lot of people living in our community and people who I am responsible for serving regardless of their citizenship status, but who were excluded from the life of the community, partly because in Indiana, you cannot obtain good identification. So we decided to just do it as a city. And we made it possible to get a city ID card for everything from being able to pick up a prescription or get your kid from daycare to being able to identify yourself with law enforcement. And it was part of demonstrating to everybody living in the community that we're concerned about everyone who is there. Now, nationally, I think we should make it possible for everybody to obtain identification so that cities like mine don't have to create solutions like this. But what you're seeing right now on issues from something like this to global challenges like climate change. More and more of the problem solving is happening at the city level because local leaders are becoming fed up with the inability of Washington to deliver solutions. And so on issue after issue, we see that so many of the answers are local, and also we're more unified at the local level. I'll give you another example. We were in rural Iowa and have seen communities like Storm Lake that, very much like some of the communities around my hometown in Indiana, were struggling because of a loss of population. And they now have had a great deal of immigration, not only from Latinx immigrants, but largely, that has really brought these communities back to life. And what I've noticed is that the places where people are most likely to buy into this administration's hateful rhetoric around immigrants are places where people don't know any. Because even in very conservative, very rural areas of the country, many communities are embracing new arrivals, recognizing that that's part of the lifeblood of how economies and communities can grow. Not only do we need an economic growth strategy, we need a population growth strategy. And it's why I have proposed, as part of our plan for rural economies, that local communities have the option to apply for community renewal visas in order to create an incentive for more people to live.
What does that mean?
So,
what kind of visa are you talking about?
The idea is it would be a fast track to a green card if you agree to remain living in an area where there is a struggle for population growth. Again, we talk a lot about job growth strategies, and that's a very important part of our economic vision. But some communities just plain need people. That is as important as creating jobs. It's a chicken and egg. And if communities empty out, you begin to have a vicious cycle where communities can begin dying. And so what we're seeing is, at the local level, people get it. It's at the national level that they have us so divided. I mean, we're entering into a climate now in Washington where they make it sound like you're either for kids in cages or you're for open borders. On the ground, we know better, and we actually are coming up with solutions. Washington should be helping rather than hurting cities that are trying to do the right thing. But of course, what we see now is the current administration breathing down the necks of communities trying to solve problems.
Interesting, because I think you paint a very interesting picture of the United States locally and nationally. On the national level, both Republicans and Democrats have been unable, or maybe unwilling, to carry out comprehensive immigration reform that would include a guarantee of the borders of the United States, but would deal with the realities of the country, the needs, but also our moral responsibility to deal with people who, for the overwhelming majority, are only benefits to our country. Many have children and grandchildren, are pillars of communities, with or without ID.
That's right.
And yet, it seems as though when you come to a national discourse in Washington, neither Republican nor Democrat has, maybe one not wanted to, the other one hasn't been willing to. It's maybe beneficial to not have it on the other side.
That's part of what it is.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, at risk of sounding a little self-serving, I think one way to deal with it is to send somebody who's not from Washington into the White House. I believe that the culture has created these incentives, as you say. For example, this White House actually needs immigration to go unsolved. Remember, if they wanted to deliver comprehensive reform, they could, because there's a bipartisan majority for it, at least among the American people, perhaps not among the American members of Congress, but there's a majority for these reforms. And yet, they haven't happened. Why? Because the White House would rather have us divided around this issue and get political usefulness around that than get the benefits of taking credit for having actually solved it. And the reality is there's issue after issue like this. It's
you can
not
say
just,
that about both sides.
But both sides are not the same here.
Of course not.
But it is the case that there is a climate in Washington that has, that I think lends itself to this struggle to solve problems. Just to be very clear, there's no symmetry between what has happened in the two parties. The important thing to look at is the difference between the American majority and the American Congress. So immigration reform, as we've been discussing, gun safety, right? 90% of Americans think we should at least do universal background checks. I can't think of any issue where 90% of Americans agree. And it doesn't even cost that much money, and it still hasn't been
Let's
delivered.
talk about that a little bit, because the House is in session again after their summer break. It doesn't seem like there is probably a lot of appetite in the Senate to deal with anything referring to gun control. As a national, if you're in the White House, what do you do? Do you go back to 1992? Do you go back to, what do you do?
Well, we know that universal background checks would make a difference. We know that red flag laws that can disarm domestic abusers and identify people who pose a clear threat will be effective and are supported by most Americans. When it comes to assault weapons that make it possible for one person to kill so many in 1 minute in a place like Dayton, the kinds of weapons that I trained on in the military, the sorts of things I saw in war zones, have no business on the streets of American neighborhoods, let alone anywhere near a school. And yet, here we are. And so part of this is also a problem with our democracy. It should not be possible for a common sense policy favored by this many Americans not to be delivered quickly. And it shows you that the way that our districts are drawn, politicians choosing their voters instead of the other way around, the role of money in politics, and let's face it, the often deliberate and racially motivated suppression of voters has led to outcomes that don't reflect the will of the American people. And it's why we need to pay attention to those fundamental issues as well. And, of course, it's why it is so important that everyone be able to exercise their right to vote, and that it be easier to do that and that everybody's informed.
So, on the gun control issue, specifically as president, what would you do?
So, two things need to happen. One, when it comes to not just the issue of gun violence, but the issue of domestic terrorism and extremism, we need to add rather than reduce the funding for dealing with violent extremism at home. But then when it comes to guns, background checks, research. Remember, they finally got rid of the ban on research, but they won't fund it. Now, if they don't want you to fund research, if they don't want to allow research to happen, you got to ask, what is it they don't want you to find out? So when I'm president, the CDC will be empowered to research the public health impacts of gun violence. We deliver red flag laws, and we deliver a ban on the sale of assault weapons. These are things that the American people support. The difference is presidential leadership. Remember, this is such a popular idea that even this president pretended to support it for a minute. And now Senator McConnell is hiding behind the White House saying, well, I'd do it as long as the president's there. Presidential leadership could get it done in a matter of days.
Let's talk a little bit about education. There are some running for president of the Democratic Party who favor free education, K through university. You don't, specifically in university. Why not, and what do you see?
I just don't think it's fair to ask working Americans to pay for even the wealthiest students to go to college without them facing any tuition costs of their own. Now, if we're talking about people where the cost of education is an obstacle, low-income, middle-income students, absolutely. We can make college not only tuition-free, but debt-free by expanding Pell Grants and making Pell Grants eligible for living expenses and not only tuition. And this time, let's actually peg it to inflation so we don't have to keep going back to Congress. So there are lots of things we can do to make it more affordable. I just don't see why the very wealthiest among us shouldn't have to pay a penny toward their own tuition. I think that we should prioritize the funding toward those where it's going to make the biggest difference.
And how would you do that? I mean, would you put a threshold, an income threshold for parents of college students? How would you do that?
Yeah, so it can be income-based. Part of it is Pell. Part of it is working with the states, because the states have to begin picking up more of the burden instead of passing it all off onto the students. And then on the back end, we can also expand things like debt forgiveness for public service. We have a program to do that now, but it's incredibly difficult to actually take advantage of. I see some heads nodding, so maybe some people here have tried to get in on that public service loan forgiveness program. Great idea, not set up in a way that most people can use it. And we would connect this up to the vision that I have for national service, which is to create 1 million paid volunteer national service opportunities a year, knowing that there are so many Americans who want to serve, and yet not nearly enough opportunities to do it.
Pete, why should I vote for you over any of the other candidates running for president?
Well, I am here to unify the American people around bold ideas. So there are some who say that the only way we can be bold is measure the boldness of an idea is by how many angry Twitter responses that it generates. There are others who say the only way we can win or bring Americans together is to water down our values and go halfway to where the Republicans are. I just don't buy it. I believe that we can rally Americans around values that should hold us together if we understand them properly. If we understand that freedom, which has been taken to be this conservative-only idea, freedom also means the freedom of having health care and the freedom that comes with education, which is why we need a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education. Women's freedom to control their own bodies instead of their reproductive health being dictated by male politicians and bosses. But it's a different conversation about freedom. It's a different conversation about faith. And don't get me wrong, I believe that when you're in office, you need to serve people of every religion and no religion equally. I also believe that this is a good moment to remind everybody that God doesn't have a political party, and that at a moment when pretty much every moral and or religious tradition I know of says that we're supposed to concentrate on the least among us, maybe voters of faith should not be expected to condone, let alone support, what's going on in the White House right now. I see a way to be bold in our values and to unify the American people around getting something done. Because shame on us if 20 years from now, we are still debating why we've gotten nowhere on gun safety, immigration, wages, climate, or any of the other issues that are literally threatening the future of my generation and everybody to come.
I could, and I wish we could continue this conversation for longer. I do that with all the candidates. I wish we had more time. But I'd like to ask maybe a minute to recap. I know you just did a very wonderful recap right now, but if you want to take it one more minute.
I just used all my best stuff.
I know, it's good too.
No, I'm kidding. Let me say, look, I know that there is a bewildering parade of presidential candidates right now. I also think we're reaching the moment when voters are beginning to make their decisions a little more specific and firm up their intentions. This is our chance. I believe we might not get another chance to deal with these issues that are upon us. You look at where our country is right now, and I think even now we might be underreacting a little bit to just how serious the predicament of our country is. But I want us to be able to look 10 years from now, look back at this moment and say this is when we took the steps to deliver an economy that actually works for everybody, to get people health care, to make gun violence of the kind we see today routinely a thing of the past, and to finally feel like the climate is not going to deny us opportunities for the future, to have a fair immigration system and manage the border in a way that actually matches our values as well as our laws. We can do that. And we would be, instead of scratching our heads wondering how we ever got to this point, we could look back at 2020 and be proud of where we were. But that's going to take all of us. Right now, they're wedging us off against each other. They're pitting the interests of an auto worker against the interests of a black single mother of three. Never mind the fact that sometimes the auto worker is a black single mother of three. They're pitting the interests of the dreamer against that of the returning veteran, when sometimes the returning veteran is a dreamer. We can do better, and we can unify without papering over our differences, without watering down our values. We can unify the American people who are being so cynically divided by those in charge today. I can do that. And that's why I'm running for president.
Thank you, Pete Buttigieg. Take the mic down. Thanks, man. Thank you very much. Just for fun, to recap the first debate that I had the pleasure to be a co-moderator of, I felt like saying, Mayor, can you do that in 10 seconds? Just answer that in 10 seconds, but I didn't. Up next, the Senator from the great state of Minnesota, running for president, Amy Klobuchar. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this will be great. Well, thank you, everyone. I hear this is your biggest crowd ever, and I think I know why. The stakes couldn't be higher, and I want to thank Marco, Ruben, and everyone in the Hispanic Congressional Caucus for putting this together. So I wanted to start by talking about the shadow that we're in right now with the mass shootings that we've seen across this country. And I think you know that for people every day, they see violence in their homes, they see violence on the streets. We lose about 30 kids a week to shootings. That's the number. It's a classroom of kids every single week. So coming off of what we did in El Paso and in Dayton and Odessa, Midland, and getting back here this week, I came back because I thought we could maybe see some movement and some action. You think about the extraordinary courage in that store of ordinary people. Moms shielding their child, the Hispanic veteran getting people to safety. And then I got back to this place yesterday, a place of extraordinary power, a place that power should meet the courage of the people out there, the people in El Paso, and I saw none of it. We need to get Mitch McConnell to call these gun bills up for a vote, and we need to do it immediately. The background check bill, the Charleston loophole bill, which allows the vetting to take place before someone goes out and gets a gun. The boyfriend loophole, that's my bill. And these things are common sense. I come from a hunting state. They're common sense. And the last thing that I want to say is we know that in some of these shootings, this has all been about race. This has been white nationalists at work. And it is more important than ever that we talk about the value of immigrants in our country. I stand on the shoulder of immigrants, my great-grandparents and my grandparents on my mom's side. They worked hard. They came here to this country. I found out my grandpa, who came from Switzerland, maybe didn't quite come here legally. He came through Ellis Island, went up to Canada, somehow came through again, and was an alien in this country for decades until he applied for citizenship right before we got into World War II. That's the story of so many people in this country. So I leave you with this simple idea, and that is that immigrants don't diminish America. They are America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. So let's talk a little bit about something you mentioned at the beginning. I was in El Paso for that horrible massacre. 22 people lost their lives, and I met with that mother who was with her 11-year-old son in Walmart, and she froze, and her 11-year-old son said, "Mami, nos vamos, let's go," and gave her the strength and to get out alive. 22 didn't make it. It's as though the people in El Paso, and I think many times a lot of us feel as though there are some who simply want to hunt Latinos. That's what the manifesto of this sick, deranged terrorist said. He wanted to hunt people.
It did.
How do you deal with that as president? Is there something you should or could be doing?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is immediately change the tone in this country. This president literally wakes up every day and in some way or some form goes after immigrants. He does it when his policies separating children from their parents, which I would end immediately as president. He does it in how he talks about people. And you stop that immediately by stopping the mean tweets, by elevating people around this nation. I always think about in my community, we have the biggest Somali community in the United States. And during the height of Trump's rhetoric during the campaign, I heard the story of a family that went out to dinner, and this guy walks by, parents, 2 kids. Guy walks by and says, "You 4 go home. You go home to where you came from." And the little girl looks up at her mom and she says, "Mom, I don't want to go home to eat. You said we could eat out tonight." You think of the words of that innocent child. She only knows one home. That's my state. She only knows one home. That's our country. And you know that in the Hispanic community that this happens all the time. This same thing. Kids are hearing those words. So having someone at the top that changes the rhetoric is key. Making immigration reform the major priority to get done in the first year and introducing the bill in the first 100 days, that's a statement. Knowing how to get the bill done so that we have a path to citizenship, upping the enforcement of hate crimes and going after these cases and making sure we're trying to prevent them and seeing them as the domestic terrorists that they are. All of this is going to be important. And then finally, what I mentioned, yes, we need to do these bills now, but ultimately we need to enact magazine limits and the assault weapon ban. That would be a big one.
You have been a representative of, on Capitol Hill for many years, many of the years where there have been different proposals for immigration reform, including the Gang of 8. Why hasn't anything been substantially agreed to or accomplished?
Well, as you know, it almost was, and then every single time we're almost there, something happens. And it has been, for me, one of the hardest things. When I first got to the Senate, Ted Kennedy, I was a young senator, and he asked me to be in the group, the bipartisan group. Sheldon Whitehouse and I were the 2 new senators that were included to get the immigration reform package through. And we sat day after day, and President Bush actually wanted to get that done. He did. And then we lost steam in the Senate. If you remember, there was a lot of right-wing radio and right-wing TV going after people, calling them masters of the universe. I remember that. And they weren't able to get the juice to get that through the Republican side. Then President Obama comes in. It's during the downturn at first. People don't seem to have the appetite to work on it, which is why I think it's so important to say it's what you want to do in the first year, right?
That first year when the Democrats controlled the White House, the House and the Senate.
Exactly. And it was during the worst of the downturn, so we had to work on the stimulus package and all of these, the TARP bill, all of this was going on. And so what happened was he waits and his second term, and then we actually do get it through the Senate. I've served on the Judiciary Committee, worked on a number of provisions in that bill, and we were proud. It wasn't perfect. We know that there's things that we can do to make it better, but it was a strong, big bill, and it had the support of the migrant community and the Farm Bureau, the AFL-CIO, and the Chamber. And any other time, this bill would have gotten through. But then what happens? Despite President Obama's strong support, it goes to the House, and it somehow gets left in the freezer of John Boehner next to the peas. I don't know what happens. They're afraid of it in an election, and they stop it, and they don't get it done. Then we have Trump come in. We think maybe he'll do something. He does nothing. And starts using immigrants as political pawns. We tried to get the TPS recipients to be able to stay, the temporary status, the dreamers. None of that worked. But this is the moment. No doubt about it, the economic imperative for our country, when we want workers in our hospitals and nurses and doctors and people starting small businesses, to me that's the case that we need to make, is that economic case, as well as the moral and
so yes, you would have supported.
It wasn't the whole, I would never support that wall. It was added security funding is what it was, and that was the agreement we made. I think that we have to look at the big picture here. I don't think we should be a cheap date. I don't think that we should make a bill that's small. I think if we take over the presidency, and I want to be that president, it's got to be a major priority, and we need to do this as a whole, not in little pieces. There are too many issues right now that have gone for too long without getting work done.
You are, in some ways, kind of different than the...
Pete and I are the only 2 from the Midwest on the stage, yes, coming up.
And what do you think that is, how are you different?
Well, I'm one of 3 women on the stage. That's different. I am also someone that has gotten things done in a big way. I've passed over 100 bills where I'm the lead Democrat. I'm someone that has been able to win in red congressional districts. 42 counties that Donald Trump won. And I have not done it by selling out on my values or your values. I've simply done it by meeting people where they are, by trying to find that common ground. And I can't think of something that's more important, because we don't need just to win in this election. We need to win big. We need to be able to win the U.S. Senate, which is in our grasp. Because if you really want to get a good bill for immigration reform done, then we need to win the Senate. And I believe I'm that candidate because of the fact that I've been able to win big in every single election, all the way back to elementary school. I always like to say that because on the debate stage, all the men always say they're the only person that did this. But I'm the only person that won my race with the slogan, "All the way with Amy Kay." So there you go.
That's great.
I have since abandoned it.
They're evergreens. Let me ask you about the economy for, lowest unemployment in African Americans, lowest unemployment in Latinos, certainly a very low unemployment. It's really full employment if you look at the numbers. There are some who say that it is important to essentially revolutionize the economy, change it in order so that all of the people can benefit from growth. You're not exactly in that camp, but how is it that you deal with an economy that for many, if not most, things are working?
I don't think it's working for most people because they're still having such a hard time affording health care or affording drugs. I think they can get jobs right now for the most part, not everyone, especially if there's discrimination. They can't get a good job, which there is. I think that what we need to do is make sure there's shared prosperity, so everyone's part of that. And that means make it easier for people to get child care and easier for them to afford their health care. So that's one of the challenges. But to me, the most hypocritical things about this president is that he inherited this economy, that because of the good work of workers and businesses that gotten out of the downturn, he comes in and then he gloats about the economy that he did not create. And so I think what leaders should do is lead. And that means that you rise to the occasion of the challenges that are in front of you. So what are the challenges we're dealing with that if we don't deal with, things are going to go really bad? The first is climate change, right? We're already seeing it with the hurricanes, what happened with the Bahamas, the flooding in the Midwest, the fires in the West. We're seeing it every single day. So that's the first thing. And I've got a very strong, bold plan for that. You can see it on my website, amyklobuchar.com. Climate change. Immigration reform, we already talked about, a big challenge if we want to move this economy ahead. Doing something when it comes to income inequality, making sure that we are working with the rest of the world and standing with our allies. These are our challenges. And this is a president that literally somehow wakes up every day and before sunrise sends out some tweet going after immigrants or cozying up to a dictator, and then before the sun is even down, has pissed off the entire country of Denmark. He did that. You know, this is not the kind of consistent, cohesive leadership that we need for our country to bring people together. So the way I think, two things. One, meet the challenges of your time so we can keep moving this economy forward. And then two, making sure there's shared prosperity so that you can't have a functioning economy if not everyone is part of that economy.
On healthcare, very quickly, what do you think are the most important things that can be done to reduce the overall medical costs in the United States?
I would put forward a public option. I long supported that, that President Obama wanted to do. That's a nonprofit option. Just out today was a report showing we've seen millions more people lose their health care because this administration has been sabotaging the Affordable Health Care Act. And so making sure that works, putting a public option in there so there's a way to compete with the insurance companies. And the one thing that no one has tackled, no one, has been pharmaceutical prices. They are nearly over 15% of our healthcare costs right now. You've got people rationing insulin across this country. You've got drugs going up in double digits, and you've got a president that said he would bring down drug prices so much it would make your head spin. Well, people's heads are spinning, but they're spinning because the drugs are going up so much. So that's what I would do. And then finally, I would add one more thing, and that is making sure everyone can vote, right?
Important.
This. That's what this is. And that means making sure we've got people that have fair voting laws, changing the laws, my bill, to allow every eligible kid to register when they turn 18 across this whole country. Imagine the change that that would make if every kid could register. And then finally getting the bad money out of our politics with a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. That's what I would do.
So, Senator, this last minute, if you want to wrap it up, and I want to ask you the same question I asked the mayor. Why should people vote for you?
You want to win, and you want to win big, you should vote for me. You want to win in those states that we did not win in 2016, and that is Pennsylvania, that is Michigan, right? Wisconsin, my neighboring state to Minnesota, Iowa, a number of those states that we need to bring back. Because when you look at what happened in that 2016 election, it was a stark contrast to 2018, where we put up candidates that won That's why we got that gun safety legislation passed in the House. So that's my first answer. The second is we've got someone that embarrasses us every day in the White House, that you've got to turn down the volume on the TV because you don't know what he's going to say at a rally. I promise you this, I will govern with integrity. I will bring people with me, and you will never turn the volume down. I will be a president that you can be proud of.
Senator, thank you very much. So nice to see you. Take a microphone too.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Senator, I would definitely reconsider that whole kindergarten logo. It was not bad at all.
Okay. Very good. I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure now to bring up to the stage and welcome the senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. What's up, brother?
How you doing, man?
Good to see you. How's it going?
Good.
So 1 minute here and then come on down.
I got a mic. I can walk around, man. You're not going to contain me over here, are you?
I don't think so. The stage is yours.
This is one of those days where you're so tired. I'm like, you got questions for me? I got questions for you.
We've got 15 minutes of that.
15 minutes of that. I just want to say how happy I am to be here as a guy who every day has been working since I got to the United States Senate to really focus on diversity. When I came to the United States Senate, it was literally the least diverse place I had ever seen. And I'm not joking. I remember one of my first time working late, and when I went to go leave, there was a line of people coming in to clean the Senate that were all black and brown people. And overwhelmingly on the committees I saw, the Judiciary Committee, I couldn't even find one staffer of color. So diversity to me is, in CHCI, you guys, I know we're here to talk about a presidential election, but I'm really here to put the pressure on you. As a person that's hired folks that have come out of this program, we are at a point in the nation where the people that are in the room when it happens are not reflecting the rich diversity of our country. So I just want to use my 1 minute just to say to everybody that this democracy is not about one person in one office. Democracy is a team sport, and we have to get more people off the sidelines into the game to bring to this country what makes us unique on the planet Earth, is that our diversity, our inclusion is our strength. And we need to all be leaders that inspires that and remembers that when you're got a seat at the table, that your job is not to be the only one or the first one. Your job is to make sure you're not the last one. And so everybody, black, brown, white, everybody benefits. In fact, Harvard has so many case studies that we are a better nation when we're a more diverse nation. And something the Democratic Party has to learn, and this is why I challenged the DSCC. In fact, I went to Chuck Schumer with Brian Schatz and said, force every Democratic senator to have to publish the diversity statistics of their staff. And guess what happened when we had senators first started having to publish their diversity statistics? More people of color and women got hired. And so the way we run campaigns in this country, can I get a hallelujah, amen? Okay? The way we run campaigns in this country is we're not investing in the communities that the Democratic Party relies on to actually get out the vote and to be there. And I know when I go to African American communities, as a senator, flying around this country, talking to people, one of the things I hate when I hear it is people say, why do y'all only show up when it's election time? Why aren't you taking ads out in community newspapers? Why aren't you hiring more people from the community? And so I know we're going to talk presidential politics, but before I take my seat, I'm really here, my excitement about being one of the presidential candidates to come here is because I don't think that this election season can be about one office. And definitely, this is not a referendum on one guy in one office. It's a referendum on who we are as a nation and who we have to be to each other. And we are a nation that is extraordinary and glorious when we live our values, not in words and deeds, but in actions. And that means making sure that we are more inclusive, that we are more diverse, that we are a nation that evidences the ideals of e pluribus unum. Thank you, everyone.
Well, let's talk a little bit, and thank you for that, because it's important. I also want to point out the fact that you were the first of the candidates that unilaterally came down to Telemundo Center to speak en Español and with the audience, the Spanish language audience of Telemundo. You did that on your own, and you asked for it, and and you were kind enough to.
But you guys dispelled me. You're like the 1%. Those are the most glorious offices I've ever seen.
Yeah, don't get used to them. I don't want you to take
If I get out of politics, I want a job, man.
So let's talk a little bit about, because it's a bigger picture issue, and you know, I was just speaking to the senator and to the mayor about, you know, I was in El Paso for moments, 12 hours after this horrendous massacre occurred, and when we have Americans who get to a point where they think they need to hunt others because of the color of their skin or their accent. And you know, 22 people lost their lives in El Paso. Is there something that we could and need to be doing?
I mean, yes. I mean, we're in a stunning state of affairs in America where attacks are on the rise. Terrorist attacks are on the rise. And as much as we've spent billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, massive coordination to deal with international terrorism, since 9/11, the majority of our terrorist attacks have been homegrown terrorists. The majority of them right-wing extremists. Majority of those have been white supremacists. So let's be clear. Folks are hunting Latinx Americans, LGBTQ Americans, Black Americans, Jewish Americans. And this is not something trivial or something small. And in the Latinx community, there were warning signs before this happened of the kind of rhetoric our president uses that's being fueling. When you talk about people as infestations, when you dehumanize people. Since this, I've had people from the media. I did this one interview with someone very well known, and he pulls me over to the side and told him he got the most disturbing call from his wife, that his wife was afraid to now speak Spanish in public. I see it in my own community. I've lived for the last 20 plus years in a city that's majority Black and brown, and I have now the level of the climate of fear that's taking over my communities, where people are afraid to go out to a cafe to drop their kids off of school. We have a toxic environment. And so are there things we can do? Yeah. And they range from getting rid of the ease of access to guns and to weapons. That's something that is extraordinarily obvious to me. And the fact that we are a nation that won't just own up to the fact that this is a uniquely American problem. It's not video games. It's not mental health. Those are issues we should be talking about, but the seminal difference and the reason why we have the levels of gun violence is because of the ease of access to weapons.
So what do you do, Senator?
Well, I want to just go to the other thing, because I think the one thing that's frustrated me about El Paso is there hasn't been enough conversation about this was the Latinx community targeted. And so white supremacy and attacks on Latinos, this is something else. These are not separate issues, they're interrelated. I want to talk to you about guns, but I just want you to know that if I'm President of the United States, the two things most significantly that I'm going to do on white supremacy is, one is have an office with other national crises. Other presidents have elevated things like the HIV crisis. I will have an office dealing with white supremacy in the White House, because I think it's that much of a problem. Number two is I am going to use my social media platforms, the platform of the presidency, in a more creative way. I'm going to be the first ex-gener ever to be in that office. This president uses his platforms every day to demean, degrade, and divide. I will see, my book's title is United. I will see every day, my challenge is to inspire civic grace, is to let people understand the truth of who we are, have a more courageous empathy for one another, not the impotency of empathy we often see in our public spheres, to understand each other more. And the Latinx community is a vital part of our nation, and we should be having far more public conversations about that. Now, as far as guns, this to me is, I am very happy that even in this short time of this presidential election, you see people moving their positions on guns. I'm happy now that something, when I put it first out, it was criticized by other people in the field as going too far. That's gun licensing. That if you need a license to drive a car in America, you should have a license to buy a gun, to own a handgun. And by the way, over 80% of Americans agree with me. And the states
So
are
you're just instituting a federal license?
one of many things that we could do that are in an evidence-based manner we know will drive down shootings dramatically. Connecticut did it, 40% drop in shootings, 15% drop in suicides. But this is more than just what the plan is. We've had a whole lot of elections, hello 2016, where the person with the best plans and the best policy doesn't always win. And I'm the only person in the United States Senate, the only person in this election that lives in a black and brown community below the poverty line. I made a decision when I was young folks aged here that when I came out of Yale Law School, I said I was going to move into the community in which I live, which 2010 census, median income was $14,000 per household. This is my home. I love my neighbors, love my community, and we've made incredible strides. I could brag about for as long as a day is long, but the point I want to make to you is I live in a community where there are shootings. I've had murders in my neighborhood. Shahad Smith died with an assault rifle at the top of my block last year. This is not a policy issue. It's not a policy plan for me. This is personal. The majority of the homicide victims in America are black men. I am tired. When I called in Philly about after they had the horrible shootings with the police, called the state legislator, he says to me, yeah, we've also had 8 mass shootings in Philadelphia. Has anybody heard about them? We have a nation that doesn't seem to see the savage deaths in black and brown communities every day. And so I'm going to the White House to live with a greater sense of urgency because my home, my family lives in a community where these aren't hypothetical issues, these are real.
What do you think it is that in a shooting in the weekend in Chicago doesn't get the coverage or the national impact that maybe if it occurred in other parts? Now that, of course, is not to say that, El Paso and Dayton and the massive shootings, of course, because of the scope of them, but the daily loss of life in this country seems as though, depending on where you are, your zip code or the color of your skin, it just doesn't matter as much.
Well, you said it in your question. I mean, why is it easy to throw some people into cages? And I'm not just talking about immigrants at the border. I'm talking about while we're sitting here right now, there are thousands of Americans in solitary confinement, children who have not been convicted of anything yet. The most vulnerable people in our communities, we seem to dehumanize them in our practices, shackling pregnant women. We have a criminal justice system. There's no difference between blacks, whites, or Latinos for using drugs. And I make this point, remember, the war on drugs is driving the overwhelming majority of our incarceration. In 2017, there were more marijuana arrests than all the violent crime arrests in our country combined. So you literally have children right now sitting in jail, can't get out for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing. And overwhelmingly, these are black and brown folks. We have gone from slavery in my great-great-great-grandparents' generation to now living in a reality where there are more African Americans under criminal supervision in America than all the slaves in 1850. And so I do think it's that impotency of empathy and not understanding that injustice anywhere, as King Ted said, is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's why I'm talking about a mindset. It is not just about having a Latinx person on the Judiciary Committee. It's not. I am not about having brown faces in formerly all-white spaces. No, it's for women, for hiring people with disabilities. It's for having people that have a broader set of experiences that can bring to the table a way to expand people's mindset, not just in issues of compassion, but also in issues of imagination. And so we've created policies in my lifetime. Since 1980 alone, the prison population in this country has gone up 500%, costing us billions and billions of dollars. Literally, we built a new prison or jail in this country every 10 days from the time I was in law school to the time I was mayor of the city of Newark. And why is that possible? Because we believe that there are throwaway people that have no worth and have no value. Because I'm not saying people think of that consciously, but we are treating human life and human dignity as if it's worthless. When to me, and our faith traditions show, it is the most valuable ideal. We profess to be a nation where we believe that God created all of us equal, but our policies don't reflect that.
Okay, so, and by the way, we could actually talk for a lot longer. So many little issues that I want you to kind of reflect on, and one of them is the crisis at the border. There is no doubt that when you have 100,000 plus people every month trying to get into the United States to ask for asylum, they're doing it, they're actually going and asking for it. They're not being, mysterious or sneaky. That's a reality that this country has. How would you deal with that? What are the solutions to that? And what do you say to those that say it's either, as Mayor Pete was saying, it's either the concept of you either have kids in cages or you have no borders?
Well, I mean, Mayor Pete's, as our other Mike Ken, is great at exposing that lie. But look, I have an infinite faith in our country. I really do. Because I've seen in other times, we have responded to injustices. When 4 girls were killed in a bombing in Birmingham, this whole country said enough. When women were throwing themselves out windows at the Shirtwaist Factory fire, this is a horrible sweatshop conditions back in my grandparents' era, the whole country woke up and changed laws. And I have this belief that the best activists out there, and this is why I always caution people about Donald Trump, don't let darkness make you dark. I was running to go jump up on a stage in Iowa, and some guy sees me before I jump on the stage. I'm a former Stanford football player, former All-American football player. The older I get, the better I was. And he puts his arm around me and he goes, "Dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face." And I didn't miss a beat, and I go, "Dude, that's a felony." And black guys, we don't get away with that often. So
Neither do brown.
No, neither do brown folks. No.
No funciona eso.
And so my point is that we have an obligation. It's a horrible obligation. It really is. But somehow we need to prick the consciousness of our country again. And the lies that are being fed into the American populace by certain media platforms and certain politicians every single day, lying about the truth, lying, demonizing, demagoguing, fear bait, all of this we know as lies. Immigrants have lower rates of crime than native-born Americans. Lies. More likely to start businesses. More likely. I can go through the whole list. We have to all be creative artists of activism to expose what's going on. I know what's going on, and when I went down during this presidential election, invited by an incredible nonprofit advocacy group that said, "Hey, we have found that if we have a member of Congress with us, it's easier to get some people over to asylum." Me and my staff went to meet with about 6 women who were some of them were survivors of sexual trauma during the time that they're in Juarez. With the metering and they are being preyed upon. I watched my staff breaking into tears listening to the raw truth of people. I know the goodness of my country. I know that this is something.
So what do you do? How do you deal with that?
Again, the differences between, and this is the thing about right now, you see Democratic candidates for president, teams around them trying to attack each other. The differences between us on these policy issues are minuscule compared to the gulfs, to the miles, the cavernous differences between us and that administration. So many of these questions is not how, it's not who has the better, what tactically you will do. That my whole campaign, I'm running this on these ideals. The reason I got into this race was because I think this election is a moral moment, and that what we need right now is to inspire that civic grace, to start to begin to see each other. And that takes artistry. It really does. The leaders, the Latino ex-leaders, the black leaders, the white leaders that we revere from our history were always in every generation, from FDR around my grandfather's time, who got Americans to see each other and better understand that we're all in this together, that we need each other. The gardens of our democracy have never been free of the weeds of bigotry, hatred, and demagoguery. The same language this president is using against Latin immigrants coming from the southern border is the same language as a major political party that rose up. Then they were against Irish and German immigrants, and they were called the Know Nothing Party. But we've beat them before. Every generation has taken on their demagogue. Father Conklin, for those of you who don't know, #1 radio show in America, anti-Semitic screeds. McCarthyism in this town driving fear and wedges in our country, people exploiting that fear for political rise. We beat them every time. But how did we beat them? First of all, we didn't beat them by using their tactics. They didn't beat Bull Connor by bringing bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses. They beat them because at that time there were artists of activism that found more creative ways to call to the moral imagination of this nation. This election, we are hurting in so many ways, not just immigration, we're hurting in our economy. I live on a street where there are people that work longer hours than my parents, and at my local bodega need food stamps to feed their family. We're hurting because across the street from me is a drug treatment program, and when I go sit with the fellas, I bring food, they get mad at me because it's vegan, and I can say this in a Black and Latino room that...
That's tough.
That's tough.
Very tough.
It's tough.
Does it taste like anything?
Oh, man.
I just want to know. I mean, it's just a question. I'm very ignorant. Does it taste like anything?
I'm going to take you to Nevada and Tacotarian, the best vegan Mexican food you can taste.
I'll take your word for it.
But this, I sit with...
I have no knowledge.
Any vegans in the house? Can I get an amen from anybody?
I'm sure.
Oh, wow.
Didn't mean to menospreciar taste, but...
Let's meet him afterwards and show him that vegans can throw down. So I sit with these guys, and they tell me their stories of being arrested, no exaggeration, dozens of times before their addiction was treated. And so what I'm just saying to everybody is, understand that. First of all, let me warn you. I'm going to give you a warning you may have never heard from a presidential candidate before. I'm warning you. If you make me your president, I'm going to ask more from you than any other president in your lifetime has ever asked. Because this fantasy that we just elect the right person, all our problems are going to be solved, has got to end. I've, in my lifetime, seen this script before. The kind of change we need is going to go deeper into our culture and our communities to begin to call out the ignorance and the bigotry and the divisiveness once and for all. This must be a moral moment. And in many ways, you know, I love this ideal in the Jewish faith that sometimes you got to go to the pit before you go to the palace. It comes from when Joseph's brother threw Joseph into the pit to die. And he didn't die there. He rose up and led a nation through crisis. Well, where King was slain, they used the words of Joseph's brothers to write right there where Martin Luther King was slain at the Lorraine Motel. Strange. It's not a tribute to King at all. It's a challenge to us in this room in the way I want to challenge you right now, because it's not just about me. This is not about having the right policy plans. It's what King said, that the problem today we have to repent for is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so in my last seconds, what do they write right there where King was slain? The words of Joseph's brothers, they uttered before they threw Joseph into the pit. This is what they write, not as a tribute to King, but as a challenge to us. They write, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of the dream." What's becoming of our dream on our watch? The dream that used to be like the Statue of Liberty, a light unto nations, calling the world to our example. What's happening to the dream? The dream that my father's and mother's generation with Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were willing to die for in Mississippi. Will the dream become diluted, diminished? Will it become divided against itself? Or will a new generation of dreamers come that stand up with defiance and say, look at me, I am an American and I too dream America? If we're willing to dream like that and fight like that and work like that, we will not only pass legislation, we'll reclaim the very hope and dream of our nation.
Senator Caroline Booker, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Muchas gracias. Senator, I get the feeling that I really didn't need to be here for your part. Just come out. And I look forward to sharing the menu with you at a future date. Thank you to all the candidates. I hope you enjoyed today's program. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I'd like to welcome back CHCI President and CEO Marco Davis. Thank you y buenas tardes.
Thank you so much, Jose, and to all the candidates who joined us today. And for our audience, hopefully you got to understand the candidates and their positions better as a result of coming here today. Now, for those of you joining us online, on behalf of CHCI, thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Telemundo for helping us expand today's conversation beyond these four walls. At this time, we will conclude the live stream portion of the event. Nos vemos! Now, for those of us in the room, before we close out this afternoon, does anybody remember what happens next? What I promised? That's right. As I told you this morning, Southwest Airlines is giving away 2